Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping on our traveling boots and heading straight into, well, the dark forests, the vast oceans, and the storm-thrashed seas of human history.
We're talking about the enduring, really fundamental stories, the myths, the legends, the tales of gods and kings and heroes, and of course, monsters.
The ones that have been told since people first gathered around fires in, prehistory.
And it's an incredible topic because these stories aren't just entertainment, and they're certainly not just fantasy. They are essentially the cultural and psychological DNA of entire civilizations.
That's right. And we've been handed this exceptional stack of sources that explore exactly what shaped these legends. Things like social upheaval, the untamable ferocity of the natural world.
And that really elusive concept, the monsters lurking within us.
That's the core tension we need to explore. Our mission today is to unpack these ancient narratives, focusing on Joseph Campbell's quest frame, the symbolic role of the wilderness as sort of a mirror for human fear.
And then finally, how cultures define themselves through their stories of conflict and war.
We're aiming for the core root of why these fantastic tales remain so deeply embedded in our cultural psyche.
To start this journey, I think we have to look at a classic example of human nature, basically setting off a catastrophe. We should probably begin with a foundational Slavic tale, the story of Ivan and Koschei the Deathless.
This story is fantastic because it establishes the rules of engagement immediately. Ivan is left alone in a grand castle, while his wife, who is actually this fierce warrior princess, is off at war. And he's given one singular, absolute instruction. Do not climb the tallest turret. Do not look in.
And of course, Ivan's curiosity, that internal, non-rational urge, it just conquers all. He climbs that tower, finds a chamber, and inside, chained to the wall, is a prisoner who appears utterly starving.
And he's moved by pity, right? An equally non-rational human response. So he fetches the prisoner water.
Not once, not twice,
but 3 times. And with that third act of kindness, the prisoner transforms. He transforms into the dreaded immortal Koschei the Deathless, who immediately recognizes his freedom.
And Koschei's first act is to bind Ivan's wife and sweep her away into the sky like a whirlwind,
turning Ivan's moment of compassion into an act of catastrophic failure.
Exactly. Koschei cries, "You fool, now you will never see your wife again." And with that, Ivan's long, dangerous quest to rescue his wife has...
And it perfectly sets up the framework for these universal heroic patterns we see everywhere.
Absolutely.
So the tale of Ivan and Koschei, like the best of these heroic narratives, is an old story that has, well, it's mutated over time.
It has.
And this brings us to our first core idea.
Yeah.
Before mass media, stories were the primary way humans explored what it means to be human, and through repetition and change, they became these collectively authored myths that define our value.
That term collective authorship is so crucial here. In societies where the ability to read and write was reserved for a tiny elite, maybe pre-scribes or royalty tales were spread almost exclusively by word of mouth.
So you have to imagine a story being passed down generationally across vast geographies by people with entirely different experiences.
And with each retelling, a detail might change. A scary part might get emphasized.
Right.
A part that doesn't make sense in a new region might be replaced. Or an element that perfectly encapsulates a local moral lesson gets inserted.
It's organic.
Exactly. It's this organic process of mutation, modification, and, re-narration that transforms a specific narrative into something not stemming from one mind or one pen, but something that is the product of a collective people in a particular place and time.
And that's when it crosses the line from just a story to myth.
And the function of myth is much deeper than mere...
Myths tell us who we are. They literally function as identity markers.
Yeah.
And they explain why we do things. We're talking about exploring the emotional, the non-rational parts of ourselves.
Yeah, in myth, logic is often secondary to feeling. Things happen on a much grander scale. The drama and the emotion are heightened because they are meant to teach these fundamental shared lessons.
And what's fascinating here is the universal nature of the desires they focus on. This craving for justice, the search for truth, the recognition of virtue.
And crucially, the journey required to return home or restore order.
They outline the essential societal value, how to treat family, how to treat strangers, how to worship the god, and what happens if you fail to observe those rules.
They're embedded in our cultural psyche because they helped structure our earliest community.
So in the case of Ivan, his failure, his inability to control his curiosity and follow that one simple instruction, it kicks off a quest that forces him to engage with every societal rule he previously took for granted.
He's left the comfortable, ordinary world of the castle behind, and now a long, dangerous adventure into the unknown lies ahead of him.
But the hero cannot succeed alone. That's a fundamental rule of almost all heroic mythology, right? Regardless of continent or time.
Absolutely. Whether they're seeking a magical weapon or vital information or just, a boat ride across a river, they have to rely on the wisdom and aid of others to triumph.
And we see this pattern instantly in Ivan's story. He wanders, grief-stricken through the wilderness, but soon encounters this wondrous palace hidden among the trees.
This is the home of the Falcon Wizard, who, hearing Ivan's tragic quest, promises help if ever it...
And this pattern is reinforced. In the following days, he meets an eagle wizard and then a raven.
And they both make the exact same promise of supernatural aid. This sets up the crucial knowledge for the success is dependent not just on the hero's strength, but on their ability to cultivate and utilize wisdom.
Ivan will need all three of them to succeed against the immortal Koschei.
This whole mechanism is what Joseph Campbell identified as supernatural aid when he mapped the monument. It's usually an older character, a sage, a wizard, a benign wit, whose wisdom and guidance are absolutely crucial to adventure ahead.
They often provide the hero with that necessary final push, or maybe a tool, to leave the ordinary world behind.
The classic enduring example in Western mythology is, of course, Merlin, the mysterious wizard who stood at King Arthur's side.
Right.
Merlin represents the integration of ancient wisdom and magic into the emerging structure of medieval monarchy. He possessed the magical powers and the historical foresight that brought the young Arthur from obscurity to claim the British crown.
By planting the sword in the stone.
Exactly.
And Merlin isn't just, some powerful guy with a beard. He is the archetypal wisdom figure. His reputation today is as renowned as Arthur's.
He's the ancestor, the direct inspiration for almost every subsequent fantasy guide. Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, the mysterious Dumbledore, or Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars.
And this persistence just shows how profoundly humanity recognizes the need for guidance when you're facing the overwhelming challenges of the unknown.
So moving from that specific archetype to the grand theory, Joseph Campbell essentially claimed that the reason figures like Merlin and Ivan's three wizards exist across vastly different cultures and epochs is because all heroic myths share a universal pattern.
A monomyth.
A monomyth that reflects a fundamental, common...
This is where we need to slow down and really understand the genesis of this massive idea, because it had an enormous impact on how we tell stories.
It did. Campbell was obsessed with mythology from a very early age, but it was during the 1930s that he spent years, literally years, analyzing ancient texts from cultures all around the world, from Native American tales to Egyptian lore to Buddhist scriptures.
He's trying to establish a unifying claim, right? That there's a universal human psyche that is appealed to by a specific recurring kind of story structure.
And to build this claim, he leaned heavily on the burgeoning field of psychology, specifically the pioneering work of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung.
That connection is key, and it's often overlooked in a simple summary. So how did Freud and Jung influence this idea of a universal story pattern?
Well, Freud's influence provided the framework for understanding the internal individual struggle, the idea of the ego struggling against the id, the conscious battling the subconscious.
So the hero's journey, in Campbell's view, is an externalized metaphor for the struggles of the psyche.
Precisely. And then there's Carl Jung, who gave us the concept of the collective unconscious.
Ah, the collective unconscious. That's the idea that all humans share certain innate structures and instincts, regardless of where or when they were born.
You've got it. If we all share this underlying psychological structure, then it follows that the stories we tell, the myth, will inevitably contain the same core psychological elements, or
So Campbell saw the hero, the mentor, the shadow, the goddess,
as these archetypal forces manifesting universally in narrative form. That intensive psychological work culminated in the 1949 publication of The Hero with 1,000,
which was this unlikely academic bestseller that suddenly became the Bible for modern screenwriting.
Famously, George Lucas, as we mentioned, openly credited the book with shaping his thoughts on Star Wars. That saga became a global phenomenon precisely because Luke Skywalker's adventures follow nearly every single stage Campbell outlined.
It appeals to that collective unconscious. It provided a powerful blueprint for globally successful narrative.
Since this framework is so influential, I think we need to move past the quick summary and really detail how these stages actually function in the narrative structure.
Let's dedicate some time to these core stages, using our ancient and modern examples. It always begins with the call to adventure.
Always.
The hero is at Rest Luke on his moisture farm, Ivan in his wife's castle, until a moment of disruption arrives.
And that disruption is usually delivered by an outside force, the Herald. The arrival of R2-D2 carrying Leia's plea, or Ivan's catastrophic failure to resist the Forbidden Tower.
The call is never subtle. It presents a clear choice. Accept the quest and leave the ordinary world, or refuse it and face stagnation.
And refusal often leads to the problem just coming back to the hero anyway, forcing them out.
Once the call is accepted, the hero has to cross the threshold and enter the unknown, the special world. This is a realm crowded with the supernatural, where the rules of the ordinary world just no longer apply.
For Luke, it's leaving Tet. For Ivan, it's entering the deep, magic-filled forests to find his wife.
This stage is crucial because it's where the hero is first truly tested. They're vulnerable because they don't know the new rules.
And they face various trials that are designed to strip away their old identity, prepare them for a
And as they're traversing this strange new world, they meet the mentors and companions. These figures provide the necessary guidance, or they join the hero's entourage. Think Han Solo, Chewbacca, and the wise old wizard Obi-Wan Kenobi.
He provides both wisdom and magical tools, like the lightsaber.
Right.
And these alliances aren't just for company. They represent the resources the hero needs to assimilate before facing the ultimate challenge. The hero might not have the power yet, but they have.
And that brings us to the moment where the stakes become, well, existential. The abyss, or near-death experience.
The plunge.
Yes, the plunge into the absolute darkest moment, often symbolized by a descent into an actual cave, a dragon's belly, or, in Luke's case, facing Vader and discovering the horrifying truth about his parents.
The hero must confront death itself, often facing their greatest fear or their deepest psychological wound. They survive this moment, but they don't survive unchanged.
They achieve a transformation, they gain new vital knowledge, or they secure a priceless treasure, the elixir, that will enable them to complete the final leg of the journey.
And that leads to the conclusion. Transformation and the hero is now capable of fulfilling the quest and must flee, often pursued by the enemy.
The ultimate goal is to return to the ordinary world, bringing the treasure or the knowledge gained back.
The hero returns transformed, capable of establishing a new world, a new status quo that comes into being in the ordinary world. The old, flawed self that existed before the call is gone, replaced by the victorious, enlightened self.
So we have this elegant, influential, and psychologically grounded framework. The question is, how well does it truly hold up when we apply it to some of the greatest legends we have, like the stories of King Arthur?
The Arthurian legend is fascinating because it's a myth built on centuries of retelling and layering. He's a mythical figure, possibly based on a real-life warrior in post-Roman Britain, maybe from the 6th or 8th century.
But the first really sustained narrative we see is by Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 11th century.
Right, and Geoffrey's History of the Kings of Britain is described in the sources as a pseudo-historical pact. It blended historical fact, Roman influences, and certainly a very generous amount of fiction.
Arthur became the ideal king, a kind of cultural wish fulfillment, standing for a perfect vision of Britain.
And to test Campbell's quest framework, we have to look specifically at the great adventure his knights undertook, the search for the holy. This is the ultimate call to adventure for the entire Earth world.
The knights were called in the most direct, supernatural way possible. During a dinner at Camelot, the castle shook violently. A holy light filled the chamber, and the Grail itself, Jesus' cup, appeared before them, veiled in white cloth.
That appearance immediately shattered the ordinary world of the Round Table.
The Grail is instantly recognized as this holy relic of heightened significance, something only the most worthy individuals can even approach.
It symbolizes spiritual immortality, and the quest for it immediately displaces all other courtly activities, calling the knights Lancelot, Galahad, Percival, out into the special world of adventure.
And Arthur mourned their departure because he knew the fellowship would never be the same. The quest was so absolute that it essentially changed the destiny of the entire kingdom.
This really highlights the evolution of myth. If you look at Sir Thomas Malory's 1485 compilation, Le Mort d'Arthur, the text is distinctly Christian. It emphasizes the Grail quest and often eliminates or sidelines earlier pagan magic like that associated with Merlin. This shows the myth adapting to the dominant cultural and religious values of the time.
This shift brings up a really jarring point raised in the sources. The identity of Malory himself. The alleged author was historically documented as a known thief, a brigand, and possibly a rapist, incarcerated in Newgate Prison.
And yet he wrote a defining text on chivalry and the defense of women.
It creates a fascinating philosophical paradox. Critics have struggled to reconcile the author's moral life with the text's moral function.
But the insight here is that the function of the myth is stronger than the intentions or character of its individual author. The tale of chivalry served a moral and cultural need for the society reading, regardless of the flawed pen.
The story transcended the story.
It did.
Let's pivot back to Ivan and his very physical road of trials, which fits that abyss stage perfectly. After Koschei sweeps away his wife, Ivan fails to defeat the immortal. Why?
Because Koschei has a magical steed and he's just too fast.
Right. And Koschei's response to Ivan's failure is brutal and explicit. He attacks Ivan, chops him into tiny pieces, binds him in a barrel, and pitches him into the sea.
I mean, that is a near-death experience designed to annihilate the hero entirely.
But thanks to the setup in section, his wizard friend, the falcon, the eagle, the raven, they sense his distress, rescue the barrel, and reassemble Ivan, bringing him back from the dead.
And this rescue symbolizes the aid needed to endure that deepest descent.
And when Ivan is restored, he gains the new, vital knowledge, the treasure. His helpers inform him that he can never outpace Koschei without an equally magical horse,
which can only be found beyond thrice 9 lands and across a river of fire at the home of the notorious Bob.
So Ivan survives the abyss, achieves new knowledge, and is prepared for the next greater challenge. The framework clearly works as a descriptive model for tracing the hero's emotional and physical development.
But is it always the same journey? That brings us to Campbell's critic. While the idea of a common humanity reflected in the monomyth is immensely attractive, especially in a world seeking unity, Campbell's theory is intensely debated by scholars of comparative mythology.
I wonder about the danger of applying one universal framework too broad. I mean, if we use the monomyth as a prescriptive lens, do we risk overlooking the unique cultural detail that make a myth so powerful to a specific audience?
That's the critical point. Scholars argue that these mythologies were developed by societies for a wide variety of purposes beyond simple psychological entertainment. They were developed to teach very complex, very specific moral lessons about being members' cultures.
Lessons that often clash between.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look closely at the specific culture they grew up. For instance, the cultural message in Arthur's Christianized Grail quest fundamentally different from the message in Ivan's need to conquer primal chaos, stolen magic.
Absolutely. The culture tells us something about the nationalistic or, the cultural background of those indigenous people.
So while the hero's journey provides a fascinating lens and a great starting point for comparison, the realm of myths and monsters is just far too strange and culturally nuanced for one model to contain everything.
We have to always look underneath the structure, pay attention to the specific cultural context, and understand why certain symbols were chosen in the first place.
That deep context often begins with the setting itself. And our next core idea is that myth uses the physical and conceptual wilderness, the space beyond civilization, to explore fear, difference, and the boundaries between the human and the divine.
Crucially, it's the place where we project and confront the wildness we carry within ourselves.
For thousands of years, most people lived and died within a relatively short distance of where they were born. Their existence was bounded by the wilderness, the darkness of ancient woods, the lonely waste, the ice-sharp peak, or the endless ocean.
So a journey to the next town was a perilous undertaking. It meant you abandoned the familiar and entered a realm that was not governed by your law.
That space, the uncultivated and uninhabited realm beyond the city walls or the plowed fields, it functions as a liminal. It's the mythological threshold.
It's neither here nor there. It's the waiting room for transformation or danger or the supernatural.
And it's the perfect setting for myth because it's where you confront difference, disorder, and the unknown. People fill that surrounding wilderness with what they fear in themselves and what they fear their society might become if order breaks.
So the monster in the dark forest is often just the externalized version of the internal monster, the greed, the rage, or the unchecked curiosity that we, as civilized people, are supposed to repress.
The wilderness, therefore, becomes the place where we expel all the parts of ourselves and our culture that we don't like.
So let's look at how the Greeks dealt with this unknown, starting with their emphasis on the city politis. Greek life revolved entirely around this organized, human-centric structure.
Absolutely. Think about Athens, the birthplace of democracy and philosophy, Sparta, renowned for its austere discipline and its hop. These were the apex of human order.
And the sources indicate the ancient Greeks were profoundly unenthusiastic about the wilderness. They saw it as purely negative, space of danger, disorder, and taboo.
Civilization was the goal, the wild was the failure.
Their discomfort with the wild is perfectly encapsulated in the god they created to inhabit it, Pan.
Pan was this strange hybrid, part man, part goat, known for his unsettling pipes and his mischievous behavior.
And most telling of all, Pan is the god from whose name we derive the English word panic.
Yeah, this illustrates the terror of crossing into the uncontrolled divine realm. For the Greeks, that boundary between the realm of human order and the realm of the divine was dangerously thin, and if you were out in the wild, you could just accidentally stumble across it.
Their cultural lesson was simple. Know your place, stay in the polar.
And the famous anecdote illustrating the violent enforcement of this boundary is the tale of Actaeon.
Actaeon was a young huntsman who scorned superstitions and felt the wilderness was just there for his use. He wanders deep into the thickening forest and accidentally intrudes on the goddess Artemis and her nymphs while they were bathing in a beautiful, secluded grove.
The transgression was immediate, and the punishment was terrifying. Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, she didn't just want him dead. She made sure his end was prolonged and horrifyingly perfect.
Actaeon's bones began to split. Antlers burst through his skull, turning him into the very prey he hunted. His human tongue was replaced by a stag's harsh cry.
But the most chilling detail is the role of his companion, his loyal dog. The sources list them by name: Blackfoot, Meumpus, Snatcher, Shepherd.
And the dog. They smelled the familiar human scent of their master, Actaeon, but they only saw the form of the stag. They changed instantly from loyal companions into fanged predators.
And they surrounded and devoured their beloved master deep in the woods.
Actaeon's grisly death, deep in the uncontrolled divine realm, warns humans not to intrude. It's a powerful story that says once you step outside the limits of civilization, the rules of loyalty and kinship are replaced by pure savage.
The ultimate horror is being annihilated by those who love.
So, if the Greeks viewed the wild as a place of terrifying, instinctual punishment, Celtic myths present a compelling contrast. They saw the supernatural realm, the other world, not as a place of raw instinct, but as a parallel realm existing right beside our own.
This other world was often glimpsed in mist or caves, hidden inside hills, or located on islands far beyond the known coast, always located in the wild beyond human society.
It was home to the pre-Christian gods of the Celts, often depicted as beautiful, seductive, and immensely powerful.
And the promises this place held were exactly what it lacked. It was a land of eternal youth and where it was always summer, with no hunger, no sickness.
Considering the harsh realities of ancient Celtic life, constant conflict, sickness, starvation, the other world must have offered an attractive mirror image and version of those struggles.
And that's why the boundary is so seductive for the Celts, unlike the terrifying Greek. But encounters were still dangerous because the consequences were existential.
We hear tales of the beautiful fairy lady who offers the hero an invitation. It seems glamorous, the ultimate escape, but there's a horrifying catch.
The problem of time.
Exactly. If a hero spends 3 days with her in the other world, 3 years pass back home. If they spend 3 years there, 300 years pass.
This paradox of prolonged life is deeply unsettling. When the hero returns, everyone they knew is dead, their language has changed, and there is no place left for them.
They're immortal, yes, but completely alone.
The stories imply that shared suffering and, ultimately, shared mortality are necessary for society to function. Endless stasis, no change, no death, no memory, is shown to be horrifying because it severs the connection to humanity.
It's an intellectual horror, not just a physical one.
And we see evidence of how deeply the Celts populated their wild landscape, tales and structures like the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland.
Those 40,000 interlocking geometric columns.
A scientific marvel created by ancient volcanic activity. But the Celtic explanation was that the giant Finn MacCool built a great bridge of stone over the sea for a fight with a Scottish rival. They mythologized the physical reality around.
Let's shift our attention from the forests and the hills to the ultimate wilderness, the ocean. Sailors across history universally distrusted the sea. They found it terrifying, unpredictable, and entirely resistant to human order, especially before modern navigation.
And the sources remind us that the physical hardship of long voyages was extreme. After just 3 or 4 weeks at sea, scurvy, a severe vitamin C deficiency.
Scurvy affects the connective tissues, but crucially, it affects mental processes. It causes paranoia and hallucinations.
So imagine weeks of isolation and physical agony, suddenly compounded by visions of strange, alien creatures rising from the black depth. This physiological reality apps fed the folklore of marine monsters,
which helps explain the enduring nature of mermaids and sirens. Mermaids date back to Assyrian culture around 1000 BC. They're part ocean and part us, embodying both our fear of the unknown deep and our longing for its freedom.
Homer describes the sirens as beguiling but deadly, luring countless men to their shore. Odysseus survived by ordering his men to plug their ears with wax while he was tied securely to the mast.
What's so fascinating about the temptation in that story is what the sirens actually sang. Scholars who analyzed the original Greek phrasing determined that the siren song wasn't necessarily about sensual pleasure or wealth,
but that the language and meter felt like passages taken directly out of the Iliad, the epic poem of war.
So the temptation wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The sirens were trying to call Odysseus back to the one thing he truly knew, his old heroic identity as a warrior on the battlefield.
That form of glory no longer exists for him, but the longing for it.
And if mermaids represent seductive danger, then there is the ultimate deep-sea night, the Kraken.
Tales circulated among fishermen and traders of the north about an enormous creature dwelling off Norway and Greenland that was so vast they literally mistook it for a chain of islands. They called it the Hafguff, which means or sieve.
This creature, which was said to devour ships whole and pull them to the depths, likely resulted from encounters with the giant squid.
These creatures rarely come to the surface. They can grow over 13 meters long and have the largest eyes in proportion to any other animal on Earth. They are truly unnatural and terrifying to encounter.
The Kraken remains a modern echo of our deep-seated anxiety about the unknown. The ocean retains its power to frighten and enthrall, appearing in stories from Moby Dick to modern mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle.
The ocean's depths are the ultimate wilderness, and we still feel the echo of that ancient, unseen power.
Finally, We turn back to land and the ubiquitous European forest. For thousands of years, Europe was cloaked in woods, making the forest a common, immediate, and mysterious setting in myths and legends. It was a wilderness right beyond the city gates, close enough to feel its shadow.
The forest represented a different kind of unknown than the sea. It was an accessible frontier, and it's often associated with social failure. It's where people who failed to succeed in the arable lands ended up because nobody owned the deep woods.
It represented the fear of failing your family or failing to maintain a civilized standard of living.
And the most famous stories of the European forest are, of course, the fairy tales collected by the brothers Grimm in the 19th century. Jacob and Wilhelm collected these oral traditions in Hesse, Germany, an area with deep forest cover and a cultural high esteem for unspoiled.
But the Grimms were collecting these raw stories, combining several versions and adapting them explicitly for an educated, literate, middle-class public.
And this adaptation required significant and very telling revisions that reflect a societal attempt to manage that savage.
They systematically minimized sexual elements and softened the darkest theme. The original tales were far, far grimmer, hence the name.
In earlier tellings, Little Red Riding Hood was not just rescued, she was explicitly eaten by the wolf. Sleeping Beauty was raped, not gently kissed awake.
And perhaps most revealingly, Hansel and Gretel were not neglected by an evil stepmother. They were abandoned in the woods by their own biological parent.
Due to economic hardship, hunger, and poverty.
That's a devastating insight. Why change that detail? Because a middle-class public reading the revised stories needed to feel a sense of moral superiority. They needed to be sure we are not those people.
The revisions shifted the unacceptable abuse, the result of desperation and poverty, away from the civilized core, the nuclear family, and on to the external, recognizable figure of the stepmother.
This is how the myth acts as a cultural boundary. The ultimate symbol of this externalized fear is the wolf.
And our sources point out that wolves rarely attack human beings. They are symbolic of the savage interior that civilization must contain and control.
The wolf is the representation of the fear that humans who live in the woods might regress and become wood-like wild, unpredictable, driven by pure hunger.
These stories are a constant, low-level reminder that civilization is ultimately a thin veneer, and the wildness within us all is always lurking, waiting for a moment.
The wilderness, whether physical or the wildness we carry within ourselves, continually calls to us, challenging our civilization.
It's the place where we can fill the unknown with the irrational, the repressed, and the dark parts of ourselves that we normally crush in the name of order.
So if the wilderness explores our internal fears and the boundary between order and chaos, then stories of war and conflict reveal a society's ethical priorities, its values, and its sense of origin in the most intense way possible.
War is an intense period of cultural
It is.
Our sources tell us that society stories of war are a way of incorporating these unpredictable, devastating forces into a belief system that helps people make sense of the carnage prevent.
They represent what a culture fundamentally thinks of itself and what its ideals are or should be.
Many cultures define themselves not through easy success, but through the painful, bloody circumstances of their founding, which sets the rules for subsequent generations.
Like the Celtic Book of Invasion. It tells the story of the Numidians. They came seeking a new home in Ireland, but were oppressed by the Fomorians, these cruel, greedy ogres led by Mo and Conan.
The Numidians, led by Fergus Redside, fought back and initially succeeded. Redside defeated Conan, driving him out.
But then Mo's second, larger army attacked, leading to this massive mutual slaughter. 30,000 Numidians fell. Only 30 survivors managed to seize a ship and sail away.
This mournful defeat, the near annihilation, is a foundational. It paved the way for the later arrival of the Irish. It made war and shared struggle a fundamental part of their origin narrative, not just victory.
The story teaches that resilience stems from surviving catastrophic loss.
And then there's Rome, the most famous and perhaps the strangest origin. The iconic image is the she-wolf suckling the twin brothers Romulus.
They survived banishment, were raised by a primal animal, and returned to found their own city. But the dispute quickly turned violent when Remus mocked the height and strength of Romulus's defenses.
And Romulus's response was immediate and definitive. He killed his twin brother. He uttered the chilling instructional words, "So perish anyone who attacks my wall."
This is a profoundly weird foundation because it rests on fratricide brother killing brother.
It's a violent, unsettling story that troubled and intrigued Romans for centuries. Yet they told it again and again, while poets like Virgil tried to replace it with a more noble account, inventing the story of the refugee. Aeneas, Romulus, and Remus retained their vivid place.
So why did this bloody story endure?
Because the narrative served as a mirror of the city's character and its supreme moral code. The central point of the story becomes, defending Rome is more important than familial ties.
All Romans, particularly in the later era of the conscript army, must be willing to sacrifice literally everything, even their closest family, for the integrity of the state.
It perfectly reflected the violence and the absolute prioritization inherent in their military society. Rome was a city defined by war, and its myth needed to justify that absolute dedication.
So war stories don't just explain origins, they actively manage the existential terror of conflict.
In Norse society, from the 8th to the 11th centuries, particularly in Scandinavia, they needed a way to rationalize and glorify death in battle, which was central to their rating.
And this is where the Valkyries enter, providing a powerful psychological mechanism to ease the fear of dying.
They are immortal warrior maidens whose job is to decide which warriors fall in battle and then transport their souls to Valhalla, Odin's afterlife.
Valhalla is not a peaceful retirement, though. It's a constant feast and daily fighting, followed by resurrection, ready for the final battle of Ragnarok.
The promise of this warrior paradise fundamentally sweetens the deal and makes dying in battle seem like a glorious promotion.
The gender of the Valkyries is highly instructive. When they are bringing the mead cup around in Valhalla, they mirror the role of the noble woman or hostess in Norse society, the providers of comfort and structure.
And they're also linked directly to fate, as female figures are nearly always the arbiters of destiny in European mythology.
However, the sources describe a truly creepy inversion of this virtuous feminine activity in the Njal saga.
The Valkyries are described horrifyingly as weaving, but they are not using wool. They are using men's intestines, and they are weighting their loom with severed human skulls.
That imagery is incredibly jarring. They're performing something that is usually an ultra-feminine, domestic, life-giving activity, but they are doing it with the tools of absolute savagery and death.
It's a mechanism for incorporating the true horror of war, the dismemberment, the utter dehumanization into a mythologically recognizable, even acceptable structure.
And if the Norse glorified the chaos of battle, the ancient Greek epic, Homer's Iliad, which details one short episode in the 10-year Trojan War, focuses equally on the terrible human cost and the ethics of warfare.
Homer makes monsters of neither Trojans nor Greek. He grants equal dignity to the Greek soldier far from home and the Trojan civilian trapped within the walls.
He emphasizes what the enemies have in common: the love of family, pain of loss, and the shared inevitability of death.
And the sources offer that perfect humanizing example of the Trojan hero. Heck, before the decisive battle, he puts on his massive bronze helmet.
And his young son, Astyanax, cries because he doesn't recognize his father behind the fearsome bronze.
Hector laughs, takes off the helmet, throws the boy in the air, passes him back to his wife and drum. That tiny domestic detail humanizes the war, making it clear he is fighting not just for a political entity, but for his family in its extraordinary vulnerability.
The poem captures the unreasonableness and the sheer brutal pettiness of war, while simultaneously urging humans to try and remain humane within the struggle.
The Iliad provides an ethical framework, acknowledging that heroism can coexist, found sorrow, and shared.
Finally, we have to look at how history, conflict, and political propaganda actively create and reshape myths around villains.
Prince Vlad Dracula.
Exactly. He ruled Wallachia, modern-day Romania, between 1448 and 1476. He was caught between Christian powers and the powerful Ottoman Empire, which had killed his own father.
And Vlad was notorious in his own time, earning the enduring nickname the Impaler for his sadistic, cruel punishment. There are grisly stories of him ordering the impalement of thousands of victims on stakes outside his capital, even dining among the dying.
And the sources note that this wickedness was rapidly exaggerated and churned out by Western presses during his own lifetime. A German Meister singer produced a poem detailing Vlad's graphic crimes, which was sung in front of the Holy Roman Emperor.
The man was rapidly transitioning from a brutal local prince into a European-wide myth of evil Eastern European weird.
This is wartime propaganda at its best. As soon as you have conflict, atrocity stories begin, and people rapidly got off on exaggerating the evil of the opponent.
Vlad became a political tool to scare the West into funding defenses against the Ottomans.
But the longevity of a myth depends entirely on a society's current need to define itself. Legends are highly changeable things, and they can be repackaged and repurposed.
That is exactly what happened in modern Romania. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a profound need for national self-definition and defiance against foreign influence.
And Vlad was recast as an unlikely national hero.
He was harsh, yes, the narrative goes, but he was just. He was the strongman ruler who strengthened central government, punished corrupt boyars, and fought foreign oppression, particularly the Ottomans.
His severity was reframed as necessary strength.
In the schoolrooms of post-Soviet Romania, Vlad's story is still taught today as a symbol of defiance in the face of immense foreign pressure. It demonstrates that the origins of a myth might be wartime atrocity propaganda, but its longevity depends entirely on a society's current political needs.
Whether it's Rome sacrificing a brother for the city, the Valkyries sweetening the deal of death in battle, or Vlad the Impaler becoming a national symbol of resilience, these conflict stories tell us who we are, what we cherish, and what we are willing to sacrifice for our identity.
We've covered an enormous amount of ground in this deep dive, tracing the journey of humanity through its story. Mythology fundamentally informs our sense of origin, like the violent founding myth of Romulus and Remus.
It helps us navigate our deepest internal fears by projecting them onto the unknown, whether through the terrifying kraken of the deep or the devout boundaries crossed by Actium.
And of course, mythology gives us a profound map for life, the hero's journey framework outlined by Joseph Campbell, which reveals the psychological consistency of the human struggle.
Even if that map can never fully contain the full strangeness of cultural context, such as the Celtic paradox of eternal life.
The comprehensive nature of mythology, the realm of myths, is too strange and culturally varied for one singular model. We must always look at the specific culture and context they.
The Grimm tales reflecting the German fear of poverty, or the Greek obsession with order reflected in the polis.
Exactly.
That enduring call of the wilderness, whether the physical unknown, the sea, the forest, or the psychological wildness we carry within ourselves, continually challenges our civilization. Even today, though our maps are digital and complete, the wild unknown will always lurk at the edges, reflecting our deepest fears.
And this brings us to a final provocative thought. The source material notes that while the physical weapons of war have changed drastically over centuries, from spears and swords to drones and algorithms, the battles within us, the greed, the rage, and the desire for glory remain much.
The Valkyries, according to one grisly saga, used men's intestines and severed skulls to weave fate. They took the raw materials of conflict to determine destiny.
So what modern material or system are we using today? Our economic data, our social media streams, our political, to weave our collective fate?
When future generations look back at our time of constant conflict, what will they read in our mythology of war? That's something for you to explore on your own.